These wedges are a fraction of the cost of big brand models, but should you be using them today? We're going to test that. With everything in golf getting more and more expensive, golfers are now looking for bargains, and one of the areas that you can save a lot of money in is wedges. So today we're going to put some cheap wedges up against some expensive wedges to find out how they perform, what are the differences, and should you be actually switching into the cheap one instead of spending loads of money and save yourself a few quid. So the wedges in question. Firstly, we have a Cleveland RTX 6 zip core wedge, which is the 6th generation of their RTX line. This wedge costs £139. We also have a Cobra snake bite wedge that comes in at £129. Then for the cheap wedges, I've headed to Sports Direct, one of our local sports retailers, and I've picked up 2 wedges for the sum of £27.98. We've got, firstly, the V100 from Slazenger. That comes in at £12.99. £12.99. Then we've got the V300, which is the new model, which is coming in, because it's a new model, they've thrown £2 onto the price tag. It's £14.99 for this one. So we want to see how they're going to stack up. But firstly, when we look at these wedges, why is there such a significant difference in price if we think that this wedge here is a tenth of the cost of the Cobra? So the difference with the expensive ones is actually the components that are going into these clubs and the options that you have available to you. You'll see that there's different shaft offerings, from KBSs to dynamic gold spinners to even graphite options. Then you're getting lambkin grips, you're getting golf pipe grips. When you actually look at the heads as well, they'll all come in a range of bounces. As well, when we go to something like the Slazenger, we've got a Slazenger steel shaft in there, their own brand one, and then we're getting a Slazenger grip that on first feel doesn't feel quite the same as maybe the Lambkin or a Golf Pride. And then actually the bounce offerings, when I looked in the shop, it seemed to be that a 56 had 12 degrees and I think a 60 had 8 degrees. There wasn't a high, there wasn't a low, there wasn't a medium. It was one bounce and that is all you're getting. So that's why we would see such a difference in price, because of what you get available to you. Now, having said that, is that actually going to alter the performance? We're going to put it through a few tests today. I want to get an initial hit, get an idea for how they're feeling, how they're sounding, a little bit of an initial spin, and then want to do 2 tests. I want to know what durability is like, because when we look at something like the Cobra with a finish where it's got the matte black finish on it, and then when we've got the Slazenger in the same finish, will this actually come off very quickly when I'm actually starting to use it? Because that's one thing I've seen from cheap wedges in the past. I also want to know as well what the spin is like. Wedges, we think that we're wanting to get a bit of spin from them. Am I going to see that maybe because of the materials used, we see a massive drop off in spin as well when we're using that? So it's time to get these in the hands and give them a little hit and see how we go. So I've had an initial test around the greens there, hit some different little pitches, close range, a little bit longer. And I think the big takeaway for me, number one, is looks. When we look at the cheap versus the expensive, they look a little bit more cumbersome. The top line of the clubs looks thicker. The leading edge looks a bit more rounded and a bit more clumsy. As well with the more expensive one, they look a bit more refined. Now, that's not to say if you went to maybe an expensive version of something like the Cleveland where they've got a bit of cavity in them, they would look a little bit larger. But generally, it just looks a little bit cheaper. You know, it looks a bit bigger, looks a little bit clumsy. When we go into feel then, again, as I expected, the expensive one feels better because of the materials that are used to actually make the head. There's also some milling on the face as well. So that's gonna all go down the line and get you a better feel, give you a better sound. It sounds crisper. It sounds, you know, sweet, as where with the cheaper one, there's no milling on the face. The material used to make the head is a little bit different. It sounds a little bit clunky, I would probably use as a word. It doesn't sound as sweet. It sounds a bit almost dead as it comes off the face. And that sort of then really reflects into the spin that we're starting to see with some of the chips close range with the more expensive wedges. I'm seeing that grab, I'm seeing that little bit of check, that little bit of bite, as where with the cheap ones struck the same, pretty similar flights. When they're landing, they're just not reacting the same. They're starting to release as we hit these chips in, which obviously around the green, I want control. So even where I've tried to hit similar shots, I'm seeing a different result. So now as we go into a spin test, is that going to come out that actually this is spinning significantly less than a more expensive one? We're going to hit 10 shots with both and find out. So we know about the feeling. I've got a feeling though that you want to subscribe to this channel. It's totally free. The button's down there. Let's get into the next part of the video. So the two wedges that I'm going to use for the spin test are going to be the Cleveland RTS 6 and the Slazenger V300. I'm looking for somewhere around about 9,000 to 10,000 revs of spin from this 56-degree wedge on my full swings. My prediction is that the Slazenger will on average have about 500 to 750 revs less than the Cleveland. So we're going to hit 10 with this first, the Cleveland, and see if my prediction is right. You can almost hear the spin and feel the spin as you're hitting these. So it's the Slazenger time now. Let's see if we can get anywhere near the Cleveland. That felt good, that one. That felt spinny. So, very interesting results here. I wasn't far off with my spin guess. The Cleveland span at 11,040 revs, as where the Slazenger came in at 10,559. So not far away from that 500 mark. So a little less spin. A couple of other interesting things here that I'm quite shocked about. The ball speed off the Srixon is 9 miles per hour slower. Is that because it's gripping the face more and it's not coming off as quick? It's at 74 miles an hour, is where the Slazenger's coming off at 83. Could also be tolerances in loft, because one of the other things that is massively different, 13 yards in fact, is that the Cleveland carried 83 yards and the Slazenger carried 96 yards. That's a huge difference. So we've got the premium one spinning more, coming off slower, but not going as far, as where the cheap one's coming off faster with less spin and getting that more distance. So for me, it's a club that I wouldn't want distance from anyway, so I'd want to know that I'm getting a little bit more spin from it. One other question I have is about durability, because one thing that I notice with cheap wedges is that they always end up getting pretty knackered pretty quickly. So we're going to put that to the test. So I want to do a durability test now. I'm going to hit 10 shots with each wedge, the Snakebite and the Slazenger. They've both got these matte finishes, and I want to see after 10 shots how they're both looking. Let's go Slazenger first. Time for 10 with the Cobra. Three. In the hole. So that's 10 shots with both wedges in the bunker there, and the wear on the cheap wedge is significantly more aggressive, I would say, than what we see from the expensive wedge. On the sole of the golf club, we're seeing a lot of the paint work has now gone and it's sort of turned to its silver colour underneath, and that's only 10 shots there. On the face as well, the abrasion marks from where the ball and the sand have been caught, they're again a little bit more aggressive, they're standing out more, and even just the edges of the club are wearing. That's not to say though with the expensive club, the sort of finish underneath is on the sole is looking a little bit duller, and there are some marks on the face and it is starting again to go a little bit duller, but they're not as noticeable. So from a sort of time standpoint, I would say that the cheap one is going to look a lot more used and battered almost very quickly, as where the expensive one is starting to hold their finish a little bit longer. And obviously, if you've got it in your bag and it's looking a little bit worn, you might be inclined to change it. So how many times would you have to buy a new wedge at $12.99 to actually keep it looking something like one of the more expensive ones? So what are the differences? What does it boil down to then? Obviously, price is $129, $139 and $12.99 and $14.99, but what we're seeing is that they don't feel quite as good. They spin a little bit less but go further, but then that durability, they seem to be sort of not lasting as long. So I think it's one of those, you get what you pay for at the end of the day. If you're not that fussed about it feeling fantastic and looking at the spin characteristics and it wearing out quickly, at $12.99, $14.99, absolute bargain. They will do what they say on the tin. You know, you can chip with it, you can hit bunker shots, and you can hit full shots with it. Just bear in mind, it's not going to spin as much. Maybe if you're a beginner, you want to look at these, but as your skill sets start to improve, maybe investing up the ladder is going to actually marry your skill set to what the actual price of the wedge is. So interesting to see the differences. Guys, if you're interested in other cheap golf clubs, why not watch one of our videos here on some cheap irons?